Greetings, noble company. Today we are going to be discussing must-haves for the modern medievalist. These are items that were used in the Middle Ages. I have reproductions of them and I use them in both my medieval and my modern life to not only enhance the beauty and utility of my life, but also to live in a more sustainable fashion. So let's jump right in. First up on our list today. Now, some of these items you all have been asking me about for months, and so I finally decided to present them in some sort of cohesive manner. Others of these items I think you need even if you didn't notice that you needed them. First one is this amazing decanter, you might call it. It is known in German as a Gutterol or a Kutrolf and some other things, and I haven't yet found the Latin word. So if you know the Latin word for this particular bendy, twisty, wonky device for decanting beverages and serving them, please do let me know in the comments below. This style of glass decanter has existed since at least the 3rd century AD. They've actually found examples of it in Cologne, Colonia as it was called back then, and going all the way up to the 17th century. So it seems like as long as there was glass blowing in your region of Europe, they probably had some kind of glass decanter in this form. Now, the neat thing about this is because of this wonky, twisty neckline, when you pour the wine into it, it aerates the wine going in, and then it aerates the wine again on the out. So your wine flavor is enhanced. And then you also have the beautiful look of this elegant piece for keeping wine. So, Contessa thrifting trick when it comes to wine. I buy super high quality wine in boxes, and then I decant it into this and use it throughout the week mostly for cooking and for serving to guests. Can't tell you how much this impressed guests when I break this baby out. So it might be a medieval piece of glass, but I use this on a regular basis. And this thing is super duper sturdy. I've had this for 18 years now. It has traveled around the world and around the world and around the world in my luggage, on planes, in crates over the ocean, being packed up and moved from pillar to post. And it hasn't even, there's not even a chip on it, let alone breakage. So, highly recommend it. There are glass blowers in Europe and the United States who make these lovely decanters. Historic Glassworks in the United States is one of them. I think Gothic Glass or Gothic Glass is the name of a big manufacturer in Europe who makes them. But check out with your local glass blower and see if they can make one custom for you. It's worth the investment, and like I said, these things are super strong. Okay, moving on. The next must-have for the modern medievalist is continuing along the vein of consumption of items in your mouth. We have this amazing pepper grinder, actually. So this lovely piece was actually found in the shipwreck of the Mary Rose. And the Mary Rose was Henry VIII's vessels, and she sank in 1547, I think. She sank in 1547, and half of her basically in the channel, the English Channel of all places, half of her was basically submersed in anaerobic mud, and the other half was exposed to the water, and of course the water rotted the exposed parts mostly away. The parts in the mud were nearly perfectly preserved, and so there's hundreds, if not thousands, of objects from daily life that were preserved in the sediment layers of the mud of the English Channel. There were also 2 bodies aboard, I should say, which is maybe not super great, but one of them was a poor sailor who got trapped, and the other was an 18-month-old dog. Kind of sad. Anyway, back to pepper grinders. So much for the brevity of life. Pepper grinder. This piece, it actually comes apart in 3 parts. You have your cellar beneath, which receives the ground up pepper, if you like, then the mill itself, the hopper, so to say, for putting in your peppercorns, and then the grinder. And you just grind, 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 and then you end up with a beautiful cellar full of pepper. I use this for all of my ground pepper needs. I don't use any kind of pepper grinder. This is 100% wood, no plastic, and the piece against which the pepper is ground is made of metal. So I like this because it's sustainable. It was handmade by a craftsman in the United States. I paid $70 for it at the time, and I know many of you are going to scream bloody murder, that's super expensive, but I've had it forever. It's beautiful, it's nice. I spend money on very little so that I can have nicer things like this. So, Mary Rose pepper grinder. for your medieval to modern cooking and gustatory needs. Next must-have, we're continuing in the vein of foodstuffs apparently. I didn't actually have an order set up when I started filming, but we're going with foodstuffs for now. This adorable little vessel is a reproduction pot, shall we say. It could be used for ointment, it could be used for spices, it can be used for the storage of any small quantity of substance. Ink, pigments, whatever. This one actually I use for toothpaste or when I go to medievalist events. I decant toothpaste into this and then I cover it with a waxed linen cover waxed with beeswax, and then I use it in my toiletry kit, my medieval toiletry kit, so that I don't have to see my modern toiletries during the duration of my medievalism. And you can also use these not just for toothpaste, but for spices. So I actually buy spices in bulk and then I decant smaller quantities for immediate access on the stove. Or if I buy spices and they come in plastic bags, then I decant them into little jars, little medieval jars like this. This is asafoetida, which is a resin that comes from a certain shrub, and it can replace the use of garlic and onions in your dishes or enhance those flavors if you want more and more intense. Little ceramic jars or pots like these can be purchased very inexpensively at thrift stores, or if you know a potter who makes them, very easy to make on a wheel. Having a supply of these is super handy. Speaking of these little jars, so you might have noticed I pulled off this cover and I briefly alluded to it as being a waxed linen cover. Now, waxed linen is super useful for replacing, in your modern life, for replacing plastic wrap. We use plastic wrap as though petroleum weren't toxic for the environment and as though microplastics weren't polluting our bodies and possibly causing increased rates of autoimmune cancer and other chronic conditions. We should stop doing that, especially if it's not essential. And waxed linen is a great way to cut back on your plastic usage. And then if, as a medievalist, of course, this is potentially what they had instead of plastic wrap. So I have a large supply of waxed linen squares and rectangles in a variety of sizes, from teeny tiny all the way up to ginormous. And I bought the first set commercially, but then I learned to make them myself, and I think I'll be doing a workshop on making waxed linen wraps at some point, or a video tutorial on it for YouTube. Stay tuned. Point is, we actually know for a fact that at least as of ancient Rome, starting in ancient Rome, they were using waxed linen to wrap bodies as a form of embalming to preserve them. And that practice definitely continued throughout the Middle Ages. Nearly all of the medieval kings of England were wrapped in multiple layers of waxed linen, which is it's not just beeswax. There's also some resin in it, which will of course help preserve the body and repel microbial decay. For instance, I believe it was Edward I, about whose tomb opening I read. They apparently opened his tomb in the 19th century, I think it was, and they took detailed drawings and records of what they found in his tomb. And his body was apparently mostly preserved, as in better than mummification. It had not really decomposed, and it was in a really good state. And he'd been wrapped in 2 layers of waxed linen, one very closely around his body, and then his burial robes were put on over top of the waxed linen, and then he was kind of sealed is too strong a word, wrapped in a second very large layer of waxed linen that didn't quite go all the way around and apparently left just the top of his head exposed, interestingly. So for certain, waxed linen was used to preserve human bodies, but there is also evidence, and okay, so this is a subject that causes a polemic amongst certain practitioners of medieval living history. There's a debate about whether waxed linen is actually an appropriate material or an authentic material for use with foodstuffs in the Middle Ages. And to that I say I'm pretty certain it was, because there is at least one reference I have found this far where it directly states that you should use waxed linen to wrap rosemary. So in the Ménagier de Paris, He suggests that if you wish to pick rosemary fresh and you wish to send it somewhere, you should wrap it in waxed beeswax and then seal it, and this is interesting, seal that with honey and then put it in a box and it will arrive wherever you wish, perfectly fresh, he says. So if you're using waxed linen to wrap rosemary, why wouldn't you use it for other purposes? And there are many, many, many pictures depicting jars like this or larger, all the way up to fairly large apothecary jars, where there are what looks very much like waxed linen sealing in the top, just as I had it here. And so combining with this single piece of documentary evidence that I found in the Ménagier de Paris, combining that with this visual evidence, I really do feel like it's a reasonable assumption, a reasonable application for your medieval life to use waxed linen. Now, that's open to debate. Let me know in the comments below if you feel that this is not an appropriate use of waxed linen, or not an authentic use of waxed linen in a medieval context, or if you think it is. Do you make your own waxed linen? Let me know what your composition is. So when I make mine, I actually make it of beeswax, pine resin, and a teeny bit of oil to add some flexibility to it. So, waxed linen for the win, medieval and modern. This is a pouch. It's pretty innocuous looking, but inside the pouch is what matters. This pouch is full of finger loop braiding. Finger loop braiding that I have accumulated over the years from trying out new braids or just filling the time when I was bored. But there's a reason I have so much finger loop braiding in a pouch. This pouch goes with me to every medievalist event, and it lives in my home, and I access it both medievally and modernly. So finger loop braiding is a technique, it's a great technique, whereby you use your fingers to create a variety of trims and laces, no equipment necessary. It's really fantastic. I do have a video on that. I'll try to remember to put that here, on a beautiful one called the Green Dorge. And I do offer also live and Zoom workshops on beginner and advanced finger loop braiding techniques. Self-plug. The reason I have this pouch and carry it around with me is because I never know when I might need to tie something up or tie something together. Medievally, I've used this bag of ties, especially the long ones. Whenever a lace breaks, then I have a spare lace ready to go, right? And I can just wax the end of this with some beeswax, which I also always keep with me, and then I can use this lace to replace the lace that just broke. So I always have some spares of that, but also even the shorter ones, which I have lots of from my classes, sample length ones basically, I can use these as pretty ties for very practical purposes. One, for my hair. And in fact, my hair, as it's done today, I tied it up, I made a bun using 2 finger looped ties of about this length. Actually, it was my stylist, who is my condottiero, who is also my husband. He's very good with hair. I can highly recommend his services for hair. For hair, his services for hair, and for dance. He's good at dancing too, and for combat, but that's it. And probably also for lute playing. Okay, I'm gonna keep going if I don't get off, put this wagon back on the rails, as it were. Anyway, these finger loop braids can be used, for example, in my pavilion when I'm in a medieval encampment scenario. This past Penzik, in August, I found myself in need of ties about this length to hang my tapestry from the spokes of my pavilion. And not only were they practical and strong, because finger looping makes super, super strong ties, because you're basically weaving probably at least 5 loops, 10 strings into something. There's like all the way up to 12 loops, which would be 24 strings. Imagine how strong that would be. So not only is it strong, but it was beautiful. So it actually beautified my pavilion while also being a practical thing. And that meant that I didn't have to go and buy a spool of modern rope, which of course, invariably, when it's just that sort of crappy whatever string, you're going to use it and then you're going to dispose of it, and that sort of increases your environmental footprint. Whereas hand braided ties are not only beautiful and strong, but you're unlikely to just toss them after single use. So reusable, pretty ties. And these can be laundered. I've accidentally laundered my silk finger loop braiding multiple times, and while it does thicken it up a little bit and maybe make it a little fluffy, still perfectly usable and still as strong and elastic as ever. So for medieval purposes, anytime you need to tie something, for example, when I'm transporting, if I'm actually transporting things in these little pots for whatever reason, yes, this is very adhesive, the wax linen, but if I want to add just a little extra, I will tie some of this finger looping around the pot. And what's nice about that is it's practical, but it's also beautiful, because I'm sorry, the world, it can be a brutal, ugly place. Every little bit of extra visual beauty just brings extra joy. So you can use your finger loop braiding to secure items as you would medievally or modernly. Yeah, I would say my most common modern use is for hair ties. So I don't use elastics anymore. There's no elastic bands come near my hair ever. So when I'm braiding my hair at night to go to bed, I use these to finish off the braid at the bottom. If I'm doing ponytails, any kind of hairstyle I do, I use finger loop braids for the ties. So, bag of finger loop braiding, an essential item for medieval and modern settings. You never know when you might need to tie something up, or someone, I guess. I didn't say that. Do you have any must-haves for your modern medievalist life that I failed to mention? Do let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, until next time, guys, stay creative and stay tuned for your moment of kitty zen. Yeah, big stretchies. Happy kitty, yeah, stretchies. Okay.